My name is Edward Miller, and that Christmas Eve, sitting at the head of my own table, I discovered my family was plotting something to get me out of here. Between lukewarm toasts and forced laughter, one of my children let slip a fate they'd already decided for me. But what they didn't know is that I also had a plan, much quieter and more devastating. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. I woke before sunrise. The cold tapped against the windows like impatient fingers, and the smell of cinnamon and roasting turkey already filled the house. I spent days polishing silverware, choosing gifts, and tying red ribbons, hoping that Christmas would be remembered for care, not for the weight of the years. I played Silent Night softly, trying to breathe life into a silence that felt increasingly heavy. The first to arrive was Daniel. He opened the door, talking on the phone. "No, we'll sort it out tomorrow." After the festivities, he didn't look at me. He dropped his coat on the comfortable chair and went straight to the kitchen. "Do you have wine?" he asked, as if I were a waiter. The pop of the cork echoed louder than it should have. I could read signs, and this one smelled like trouble. Soon the others arrived one by one, with laughter that didn't include me. They talked about travel and business as if I were a spectator in my own home. I served canapes. They served opinions. "Dad, sit down, this is heavy for you." I smiled, but the weight I carried wasn't in my hands, but in the feeling of being pushed aside. The turkey came out golden, its skin crackling like wrapping paper. I placed it in the center of the table. "I made it just the way you like it." A brief silence, then silverware and plates. My granddaughter whispered, "Thank you." Daniel, nothing, just calculating glances that roamed the room as if measuring space. A chill ran down my spine. I tried to remember our first Christmas in that house, when the power went out and we ate dinner by candlelight. Some laughed, but Daniel glanced at his watch and said, "The world changes. We need to adapt." I nodded, unsure why those words sounded more like a warning than a reflection. When I suggested a toast, I raised my glass, but Daniel stepped forward. "Let me do the talking." He straightened and said, "This is the year to get everything back on track. Organize the house, the routine, think about what's best for everyone." The word everyone chilled the air. I saw quick glances exchanged as if a code was being followed. The candles flickered, casting a shadow on the wall of the porcelain angel that seemed larger than the object itself. I can't explain it, but at that moment I realized it wasn't just dinner that was being prepared. There was a plan on the table, a plan that didn't include me staying there. My stomach tightened. This wasn't just a lack of attention or coldness. It was the same feeling you get when you discover someone's betrayed. First comes the silence, then the shock. I looked at each of them, guarding my expressions. Anyone who thinks they can take what's mine hasn't yet understood my way of exacting revenge. I continued serving as if nothing had happened. That's how you confront a planned robbery, not with shouting but with patience. I remained silent, but inside, every piece was already starting to move, and in their game, I was still the one controlling the board. As the glasses filled and the aroma of roast meat filled the room, I realized that night wouldn't be remembered for the taste of the turkey or the wine I chose. It would be remembered as the moment they tried to bring me down and unknowingly began to create their own downfall. Daniel's toast ended with timid applause. Glasses clinked, but there was no warmth in the gesture. I smiled politely, observing the movement around the table. There was something rehearsed in the way they looked at each other, as if phrases had been previously agreed upon. It felt like being on stage, unaware of the script, but certain that I wasn't the protagonist. I poured more wine, trying to lighten the mood. The sound of the liquid hitting the glass seemed louder than the voices. It was then that the daughter-in-law laughed. "Next year, maybe dinner will be somewhere else, to make things easier." Some nodded. Daniel added with a half-smile, "Yeah, maybe it's time to think about what's practical for everyone." And there it was again, practical. Throughout life, I've learned that practical often means without you in the way. I kept smiling, but I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I continued serving, pretending not to notice, because I understood that this wasn't the time to react. Betrayal isn't dealt with in the heat of the moment. It's dealt with planning and coolness, like in a good game of chess. As I passed the plate of farofa, I noticed my hand trembling slightly. Daniel noticed. He arched his eyebrow as if confirming something already decided. Across the way, my granddaughter played with her napkin, but her eyes flicked to mine, full of concern. She seemed to know more than she let on. The conversation shifted to important topics: travel, business, investments. Daniel spoke as if presenting a project, and the others listened with respectful attention. I observed, trying to figure out where I fit into this plan, or if they'd already decided there was no longer room for me. Dessert arrived. My youngest daughter laughed. At least Dad doesn't have to worry about anything, since we're taking care of everything now. And the room erupted in laughter. Someone added, "That is, if he doesn't insist on doing things the old way." The tone was joking, but the aim was accurate. It wasn't humor, it was a message. I felt the blood rush to my face. It wasn't just discomfort, it was the realization that the theft they planned against me wasn't just material, but emotional as well. They wanted to take what I'd built and erase the respect I'd always had at that table. I hid it by drinking the coffee, but the bitterness seemed to carry with it the word exclusion. It was then that I heard Daniel say, almost whispering to his wife, "We'll figure it out, after the festivities." It was no longer just an impression. Those glances and loose phrases were part of the same plan. And for the first time that night, I was certain that dealing with meant removing myself from the picture. I looked at them and silently promised myself that no humiliation would go unanswered, that this revenge wouldn't be impulsive, but calculated. It wasn't enough to foil the coup. I would make them feel, one by one, the weight of having underestimated me. As the background music tried to create a harmonious atmosphere, I realized there was no turning back. They had crossed a line. And I, who had always believed that family was a refuge, now saw before me the most treacherous battlefield of all. I left the room to get more napkins. I needed a moment away from the forced laughter and the stares that seemed to measure my time there. The kitchen was silent, only the sound of the sauce simmering in the pan. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the weight of what I'd already heard, but fate seemed determined to show me more. The voices grew closer. It was Daniel, along with my youngest daughter. They hadn't noticed me standing behind the half-open door. "Everything set for Monday?" she asked. "Yes," Daniel replied, sounding relieved. "I've already spoken to the lawyer. We'll sign the papers after the holidays." My hand paused on the drawer handle. The metallic sound echoed softly, but loud enough to make my heart race. "He won't even notice," my daughter continued. "Let's just say it's for his own good, that he'll have company and care there." Sweet words for a bitter blow. Daniel chuckled. "And we'll be left to sort out the house our own way. It'll be easier without him here, more practical." Again, practical. It wasn't about caring. It was about stealing. It was about erasing my presence from where I had always been the foundation. It was betrayal disguised as concern. I felt my blood run cold, but I kept my body steady. Hearing that wasn't just heartbreak, it was confirmation. Everything my intuition had been screaming now had proof. The sound of the bowls in the room seemed to come from another world, a world I no longer belonged to. They left laughing, chatting about dessert, unaware that I'd heard every word. I waited a few seconds before moving. Each step toward the pantry felt heavier, but also more decisive. I opened the door and found the blue folder filled with old documents, deeds, policies, trust records. I ran my fingers over the cover and felt a strange mixture of pain and calm. Pain, knowing that those I protected most wanted to discard me. Calm, knowing that on their board I still held the strongest pieces. There lay my true weapon, not physical strength, but legal control over what was mine. I returned to the living room with a serene expression, carrying napkins as if nothing had happened. No one realized that, at that moment, I already had all the information I needed, and that was more valuable than any gift that night. I sat back down at the table and watched each of them, like a player studying his opponents before the final move. There was no rush. Well-executed revenge is like fine wine. It needs time to mature, and I was willing to wait for the right moment. In that moment, I realized the best response wasn't to interrupt the party. It was to let them believe I knew nothing, until it was impossible for them to reverse what I was about to do. And deep down, I began to savor victory, even before the first move. I returned to the table with a plate of dessert in my hands. The smell of French toast and fresh coffee still filled the air, but for me, the taste of that night had already soured. I sat at the head of the table, observing every face and every gesture. Now, with the truth exposed, everything seemed clearer. Even the smiles had sharp edges. Daniel raised his voice to get everyone's attention. "Before we open the presents, I think we need to talk about something important." Conversations ceased. The sound of the clock ticking away seemed louder than usual. I folded my hands on the table and just waited. "Dad," he began, his tone rehearsed, "we've been thinking about what's best for you. This house is too big, and you spend too much time alone." The words were coated with false concern, but the venom was in the subtext. It wasn't about caring, it was about getting me out of the picture. My youngest daughter added, "It's a great place with people your age, activities, doctors. You'll love it." Some smiled, as if it were good news. Others avoided my gaze, perhaps uncomfortable, but no one objected. And that, for me, was as serious as their words. I swallowed slowly, feeling the coffee burn in my throat. It was my own family, in my own home, using the pretext of care to commit an emotional robbery. I could have screamed, but I chose silence. Silence, when used at the right moment, is a form of revenge. Daniel continued, "We've already thought of everything. We'll take care of the paperwork after New Year's. That way, you don't have to worry about a thing. No need to worry. For them, it meant no need to give an opinion. It was the final attempt to wrest from me not only my home, but also my control over my life." I looked around. I saw knowing looks, as if a deal had been struck long before that night. The betrayal was so well rehearsed, it almost felt like a play. But they didn't yet know that the ending of this story wouldn't be written by them. I stood firm. A faint smile tugged at the corners of my lips, not because I agreed, but because I knew that at that moment the game was already lost for them. Overcoming this for me would begin with a simple decision: to let them feel like winners. For now. When the awkward silence fell, I lifted my cup and took the last sip. Inside, I could already visualize every step of the counterattack. It would require patience and precision, and I had both. As they prepared to open their presents, I was already wrapping my own gift for them, a silent but devastating plan that would ensure they would never try to steal from me again. And the first part would begin that very night. The conversation continued, but I could no longer hear the words. They were just distant sounds, like an annoying buzz. I put my cup down, wiped my mouth with my napkin, and stood up slowly, as if I were just going to get some air. No one tried to stop me. Perhaps they thought I needed to digest the news. I walked down the hallway, each footstep echoing on the tiled floor. I passed through the office door and closed it behind me. The smell of polished wood enveloped me, along with the memory of decades stored there. I turned on the lamp. The yellow light illuminated the antique bookshelf that hid more than just books. I knelt before the lower panel and, with a discreet click, revealed the built-in safe. My fingers turned the memory combination. The door swung open without resistance, revealing labeled folders, sealed envelopes, and a set of keys. This wasn't just paper, it was the real power against any attempted burglary. I picked up the deed to the house, still registered solely in my name. Next to it was the trust agreement, shielding my assets from any unauthorized transfer. There were insurance policies, investment receipts, and copies of past donations, all documented. Each sheet was a shield against the betrayal they were attempting to execute. At the bottom, I found an envelope marked Plan B. Inside, instructions written years earlier, with contact information for a trusted lawyer and accountant. I smiled to myself. The future they planned for me depended on a weakness I'd never possessed. They wanted to take me away, but I was ready to survive and turn the tables. I sat at my desk, spreading out my documents before me. I ran my fingers over each paper, remembering why I'd kept them so organized, to never depend on anyone's goodwill. In that moment, I realized that my breakthrough would come from precision, not haste. I closed the safe, but kept the leather briefcase handy. Tomorrow, the first call would be to the lawyer. Until then, I would be the quiet, defenseless man they thought they could control. That would be the sweetest part of revenge, letting them believe they had the upper hand. I returned to the living room. Dessert was already finished, and Daniel looked at me as if to gauge my reaction. I smiled at him, but there was nothing cordial about it. It was a silent warning that the tables were about to turn. While they exchanged gifts, I was already wrapping mine for them, a precise cut to every advantage they had over me. There would be no discussion, only action, and by the time they realized it, it would be too late to undo it. That Christmas Eve for them would end with laughter and a false sense of victory. For me, it was just the beginning of the operation that would make them understand once and for all that betrayal is a heavy price to pay, and that stealing from the wrong person has irreversible consequences. The next morning, I woke before everyone else. The sun hadn't yet broken through the winter fog, and the house was plunged into an almost solemn silence. I picked up my leather briefcase and placed it on my desk. Today, every move would be calculated. There would be no room for improvisation. My revenge needed to be as precise as a scalpel. The first phone call was to the lawyer. His calm voice understood the gravity of the situation without me needing to explain everything. "Immediately revoke all existing powers of attorney," I ordered. Within minutes, I received confirmation that no signatures from them would be valid on my assets. The first barrier against theft was erected. Then I called the bank and requested that all additional cards issued in the name of family members be blocked. The attendant hesitated. "Do you want to cancel them permanently?" I simply replied, "Yes." The feeling of cutting this invisible line of dependence was liberating. Another step in my overcoming. I moved on to the household bills. Electricity, water, internet, all registered in my name and paid with my money. I called and requested a transfer of ownership for each of them. The response would be immediate. Without my support, maintaining the comfort they enjoyed wouldn't be as practical as they imagined. I revised the trust agreement and changed the successor beneficiary. Previously it had been Daniel. Now it would go to my eldest granddaughter, the only one who hadn't treated me like a burden. I also made a note that any challenge would be legally futile. This change wasn't just protection, it was a message. The last phone call of the morning was to the accountant. I asked him to stop any monthly transfers to the joint investment account I had with my children. "Transfer everything to a separate account under my CPF number only," I ordered. His silence before saying, "Understood, Mr. Miller," was music to my ears. When I finished, the clock struck just after 10. The briefcase was lighter now, but the weight on my chest had disappeared. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had control of every piece of the game, and that this time no one would take it from me. I left the office and passed Daniel in the hallway. He yawned, still sleepy. Up early, Dad, I replied with a calm smile. I had things to take care of. He laughed, thinking it was something trivial. Little did he know that his castle was already beginning to crumble. As the aroma of coffee wafted through the kitchen, I felt a different calm. It wasn't ordinary peace, it was the serenity of someone in command. They still believed they had time to complete the betrayal, but time was now working for me. And in that moment I realized that my greatest victory would be to watch, in silence, the exact moment they discovered that the entire plan had fallen apart, and that nothing they tried could reverse what I had already done. The next day began with a different silence. It was no longer the calm silence of the previous morning, but a heavy silence, broken by hurried footsteps and slamming doors. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard the first raised voice. It was my youngest daughter, on the phone. "The card didn't go through." "What do you mean it didn't go through?" Minutes later, Daniel appeared at the door, still in his pajamas, his face drawn. "Dad, did something happen with the joint account?" "The card was declined at the grocery store." I took a sip of coffee before replying, "Oh, it must be some adjustment at the bank. Better talk to the manager." I kept my tone neutral, as if it were just a trivial matter. As he walked back to his room, the landline rang. It was the power company confirming the change of ownership. As requested, the December bill will now go to the new person responsible. I thanked him, hanging up before anyone could hear the rest. A small cut, but effective. Late in the morning, a car pulled up in front of the house. The lawyer got out, carrying a black briefcase. I asked him to go straight into the office. Within minutes, the official notices were on the desk. Revocation of powers of attorney, changes to the trust, cancellation of transfers, and blocking of access. Each document was a bulwark against the attempted robbery. Daniel entered the office without knocking. "What's this, Dad? Are you getting paranoid? We just wanted to take care of you." His voice wavered between indignation and fear. I held his gaze before answering, "Care or control? Because those are two very different things." He tried to argue, but his words were no longer firm. There were long pauses, as if searching for an argument that didn't exist. My youngest daughter appeared at the door, holding her cell phone. "Dad, the internet is in your name too. What are we going to do?" I just smiled. "You're adults. You'll figure it out." The rest of the day was a symphony of nervous phone calls, hushed messages and glances that avoided my gaze. To me, it was music. Each attempt to regain what they'd lost only confirmed that there was no going back. Revenge was happening in real time. I sat in the living room armchair late one afternoon with a cup of tea. The Christmas tree still twinkled, but now, for me, that light represented something else. The clarity that overcoming comes not from forgetting, but from calculated action. They wanted to get me out of here, but now they knew this house had an owner, and that owner wasn't willing to give up anything. And while they tried to reorganize, I just waited for the final moment when their defeat would be officially announced. And in that instant, I realized that the next step would not only be to keep what is mine, but to make it clear that any new attempt at betrayal would have the same end, the ruin of whoever dared to underestimate me. On the morning of the 26th, I woke up with a light weight on my chest, the kind of relief that only comes when you know nothing is out of place. The kitchen was silent, but not the uncomfortable silence of days past. It was the calm of knowing the rules have changed and the game is now being played on my terms. I called everyone into the living room. Some came reluctantly, others still with faces lined with sleeplessness. I waited until they were seated. I placed a folder of documents and the original deed to the house on the table. "I think it's time to clarify a few things," I began firmly. I opened the folder and calmly removed each paper. "This house is in my name only. It always has been. All the comfort you had, bills, cards, loans, came from me. That's over. From now on, each of you is responsible for your own affairs." The reaction was silence. Some looked away, others stared at me in shock. Daniel tried to interrupt. I raised my hand. You taught me something this Christmas. When someone thinks they can take what's mine, it's because they've forgotten who built it all. Well, remember that now. The weight of those words was stronger than any scream. I handed each of them a copy of the legal amendments. You have 30 days to settle your expenses. If you want to stay here, pay rent. If you don't, the door is open. I didn't speak angrily. I spoke with the certainty of someone who has already won. My granddaughter came over and hugged me. "Grandpa, can I stay with you?" I hugged her tightly and replied, "Always, because you respect me, not because you need me to pay your bills." It was the only genuine display of affection I received that morning. I got up, gathered the papers, and returned to the office. Behind me, arguments, accusations, and justifications began. It didn't matter. None of it would change the fact that the coup had failed and the game was over. I sat in my chair and looked out the window. The snow fell slowly, covering the garden, as if trying to erase all traces of everything that had happened. But inside me, nothing was forgotten, simply closed. I grabbed my phone and sent a single message to the family group. "Merry Christmas. The house stays with me. Respect, too." Then I turned off the phone and closed the curtains. For the first time in many years, I fell asleep peacefully in the home that has always been and always will be mine. And in that moment, I understood that true overcoming isn't forgetting the betrayal, but ensuring it never happens again, and that whoever tried to rob me learns, once and for all, that respect isn't asked for, it's imposed. And if your own family tried to tear you away from home using excuses to hide a betrayal, what would you do? Would you remain silent, expecting the worst? Or would you show that no one can steal what you've built without paying the price? I've proven that overcoming comes when we take control and command respect. Now I want to know, if you were me, would you have done things differently? Write in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss more stories like this.